Now that we know about the legend of the Skinwalker, let's talk about how the ranch itself came to be. In 1880, the US government began to move several bands of Ute tribes to a reservation on the land around the Skinwalker Ranch. And a few years later, in 1886, the construction of Fort Duchesne is completed by the US military. From 1906 to 1911, strange noises are heard. A newspaper reports landowners saying they can hear strange noises coming from the Uinta Basin. The noises were described as strange, rumbling sounds, faraway explosions, and thunder. According to the newspaper, it was reported the noises started when the Ute tribes moved onto the reservation. Many of these moves were official and documented. In 1906, a husband and wife from one of the Ute tribes was given land on the ranch. 8 years later, in 1914, they sold the land to a man named Henry Lister. He would move into what is now known as Homesteads 2 and 3. Christopher Locke, a younger member of his family, had a very strange experience on the ranch. He was visited by a stranger. The stranger just appeared out of nowhere and was dressed oddly. He wore clothing that was appropriate, but underneath these clothes, he appeared to be wearing a sparkling one-piece suit. The stranger was given the water he requested and proceeded to have a long, serious talk, telling him about the places he should never dig on the ranch. In 1930, the first cattle mutilation is reported. Due to how these things normally work, it's reasonable to believe these weren't the first events. Odds are there were other mutilations, and the Lister family tried to chalk them up to more normal, natural means, like predators and disease, and only after they were unable to deny what was going on would they risk reporting something that would make them look crazy. In 1937, Kenneth John Myers and his wife Edith Child Myers bought Lot 3 of Skinwalker Ranch. The Myers family built a small homestead on the 160 acres in the northwest part of the property. Years later, they moved to the east side of the property. They lived on the ranch until 1987, 50 years. They personally did not report anything strange during the time they lived on the ranch, but nearby neighbors would report strange lights in the sky over the ranch. Over the next few decades, there would be hundreds of UFO sightings reported. Strange crafts, ranging from about 20 feet across to bigger than a football field, were seen. The crafts not only varied in size, but also in shape. Orbs, triangular or pyramid-like, cigar shape, and even fireballs were seen in the sky, emitting a wide variety of colors. The sightings continue to this day. After the Myers moved out, the ranch was abandoned for a few years. In the summer of 1994, Terry and Gwen Sherman bought the 480-acre ranch and moved in with their 2 children. They were excited. It was the perfect place for a cattle ranch. They couldn't believe it was sitting empty for so long. It was the ranch of their dreams, but it would only last for 2 years. Gwen worked at a bank in town, and Terry was a rancher and an outdoorsman who enjoyed hunting and fishing. He had degrees in animal husbandry and was very serious when it came to his cattle. He planned on an only 1% loss on his prize steer a year, while most ranchers expect about a 5% loss due to disease, predators, and other unknowns. They immediately noticed some strange things when they moved in. The previous owners placed deadbolt locks on the kitchen cabinets. On each side of the house were large iron poles. The Shermans thought maybe they were used to chain guard dogs. But Garth Myers, the brother of the previous owner Ken Myers, stayed at the ranch often, and he said they never had any dogs at the ranch. They also found strange circular marks in the grass, some being as deep as 2 feet. One set of marks formed a 30-foot triangle. The strange occurrences on the ranch continued. The first remarkable incident happened the day the Shermans were moving in their furniture. They were out by a corral that contained some calves. While caring for the calves, they saw a huge wolf. Terry explains how odd it was. The wolf was so big, but for some reason they weren't afraid of it. They say the wolf seemed tame, and described it as having piercing blue eyes, and said it smelled like wet dog, though that was probably due to the rain that day. They began petting the wolf, then calmly the wolf went over to the fence and grabbed the head of one of the calves that had its head through the bars. The wolf began pulling at the calf, trying to pull it out. Terry ran over and began kicking the wolf very hard in the ribs, but it didn't seem to do anything. He then hit it with a baseball bat, and the wolf still didn't react. Terry, experiencing a mixture of fear and confusion, instructs his son to go to the truck and get his .357 Magnum out. Terry shot the wolf. But the wolf just looked at him, not moving, not bleeding. He then shot it 2 more times. Still no reaction. The wolf just stared at him. Terry screamed to his son to go grab his .30-06 bolt-action rifle from the truck. It's a strong rifle he'd hunted elk with. He was sure that it would take down the wolf. He shot the wolf a few more times. On the last shot, a small amount of flesh came off the animal, and then it nonchalantly trotted away. Because the wolf was a threat to the cattle, Terry and his son decided they would follow it. They lost sight of it, but could easily follow the tracks left in the mud. The tracks led them through a wooded area out of an opening by a river. They followed the tracks in the mud to about 60 feet from the river where the tracks just stop. There was nowhere for the wolf to go. It was just gone. They never saw it again. Later on, Terry studies the piece of flesh that came from the wolf. He said it smelled like rotting flesh. Not long after, Gwen Sherman was driving when she encountered another bizarre wolf. It was right next to her car. She said it was so tall it had to bend down to breathe on her driver's side window. Its shoulders were at the top of the car. Its head must have been 5 feet from the ground. The largest recorded wolf is the male Alaskan wolf. They're around 4 feet tall, and no wolves had been sighted in Utah since 1929. Gwen thought maybe it was a pet that had escaped, but none of her neighbors kept wolves. She also said she'd seen a large black dog in the distance while driving. She said its head looked way too big for its body. Then cattle began to go missing. It was like they just vanished. Some of them were eventually found, dead and mutilated in very strange and disturbing ways. One evening in May 1995, Terry was out taking care of his cattle when he saw a glowing craft fly over a tall patch of trees bordering the field. He said it made no sound. Gwen was out in the yard later that week when she witnessed something similar, a strange object in the sky. It looked like it had headlights, but they didn't look like they were connected to the craft itself. The bright lights illuminated the side of the mountain like it was the middle of the day. Soon after these strange objects were being seen, Terry started finding his cattle dead. While examining one of the cows that died, he noticed, right in the center of the cow's left eyeball, there was a perfect hole. Also, there were no signs of decomposition, and scavengers weren't interested in the dead cow. Gwen and Terry also smelled a strange chemical-like smell in the area. Shortly later, another cow was found dead, with the same hole in her left eye. Terry became curious and took a wire to measure the depth of the hole. The hole went straight to the middle of the cow's brain. The cows continued to disappear. The Shermans would go out looking and even got their neighbors to help search, and found no signs of the cows. Winter came, and during a huge snowstorm, Terry was out looking for one of his prize cows. He saw tracks from the cow and followed them. He could tell by the tracks the cow was running and frightened, but there weren't any tracks from a predator following behind. At one point, the tracks show she was frantic and running in circles. They ended at the edge of a field under a bunch of trees. The tracks just stopped. The final tracks were surrounded by small branches that appeared to be in a circle. Another incident occurred when Terry and his son were out during a heavy thunderstorm, looking for a calf that had gotten out. Terry's son found a cow stuck in a ravine by a creek. She was stuck in the mud and couldn't move. She was in distress, but otherwise, she was okay. Terry first rescued a calf who needed more immediate help and brought it to its mother. When he came back for the cow 20 minutes later, he found it dead. She was laying on her side. Her anus was cored out. It was a 6-inch perfect circular hole. The entire contents of her body were gone. No blood was found, and there were no tracks by the body. It seems no matter what they did, Terry would continue finding his cattle dead and mutilated. The family also began to be tormented by disembodied voices, apparitions appearing at the edge of their beds, faces looking in the window, and objects disappearing to appear somewhere completely different. Orbs were also seen often, and the entire family suffered from nightmares. One day, Gwen returned from the store and took out her groceries from the bags to put them away. She turned around for a moment, and when she turned back, all her groceries were packed back in the bags like she'd never taken them out. During the summer, Terry and his son were out on one of the pastures when they heard disembodied voices that they couldn't understand. They sounded like they were coming from above their heads. They thought that maybe it was coming from an echo of a CB radio. They listened close and could then determine it was two voices, but it was a language they didn't recognize. Terry said it was like a combination of Native American and Russian. The voices were different pitches. One was high, one was low. Terry said out loud, "We can hear you." They stopped for a second. Then the lower voice laughed, and they continued talking. In the next episode, the strangeness continues, so make sure you subscribe and ring that bell.